Iran has begun to deal with the consequences of its ties with the Russians, and today in Tehran they are openly saying that it was a huge mistake for Iran in general to get involved with Russia and hope that you can build some kind of alliance or partnership with the Russians. And now high-ranking officials in Tehran are saying that there's no point in hoping that Moscow will ever help. And it's worth remembering for centuries that it's not worth dealing with the Russians. In Tehran, a man with enough political influence, his name is Syed. Mohammad Sadr said out loud what people used to just whisper. He accuses Russia of passing information about Iranian air defense systems to Tel Aviv during the June war with Israel, after which Israeli missiles struck those systems. He adds, there you have it, your supposed partner and ally, Moscow. Almost simultaneously, Europe initiates the SNAB snapback mechanism for the Iranian nuclear deal. This is the reinstatement of old sanctions against Iran at the United Nations level. Longtime subscribers to my YouTube channel know what this is. Why launch this snapback now? And as a result, Iran finds itself in a situation where, on one hand, the ally that Iranians were counting on, Moscow, simply betrayed Iran. And now they publicly admit it in Tehran. And on the other hand, Europe is bringing back rather tough sanctions against this country at the United Nations level, and Iran is left all alone. Well, in Israel, they say that if Iran doesn't want to go for a nuclear deal, then probably they'll have to repeat the events of June. So these aren't separate pieces of news, it's one story. On one hand, we have the picture of a quarrel between Moscow and Tehran. On the other hand, there are Western sanctions. Let's figure it out together in this story. Let's lay everything out clearly, as they say. My name is Alexei Pichi. Today is August 28th. And before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, write any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So let's start with who Syed Mohammad Sadr is, who today stated that a strategic alliance with Moscow is absolutely useless. That's his quote. Well, first of all, Sadr is not some anonymous Telegram channel or some source in the government in Tehran, you know. He is a member of the Expediency Council, the body in Iran that filters any decisions made by the authorities. He gave an interview and said a simple and very painful phrase. Quote, Russia claimed that it did not approve of Israel's strikes, but in fact it helped. And he adds that, yes, it means Russia helped the Israelis carry out strikes against Iranian air defense. And then the wording gets even harsher. It means Sadr says a strategic alliance with Moscow is useless. Well, as you understand, I don't need to convince anyone that Israeli intelligence is strong enough without any help from those unwashed Russians. That's not the point. The point is that we're talking about an Iranian political heavyweight. Because the Expediency Council is a body that's very close to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and he really does filter all the decisions that are later made public. So he publicly, well, basically spat in the face of the Kremlin by saying, listen, these are traitors, Russians are traitors. To hope that they could ever build a strategic alliance with you, is that even possible? You have to be not very smart. And this slap in the face to already unwashed Russians, you know, is a signal that's heard in Riyadh, it's heard in Brussels, it's heard in Washington. And everyone understands that Iran is disappointed in its ties with the Russians. Well, now the second part of the puzzle in this story with Iran, this is the snapback. You may have already heard about this in the news today. What does it mean? Europe, the so-called E3 group, which is the United Kingdom, France and Germany, has officially notified the United Nations Security Council. Quote, we are initiating the restoration of sanctions against Iran. The wording is rather dry, but the meaning is clear, even to someone far from diplomacy. The Europeans say we use the old snapback button and they'll return in 30 days. Restrictions on weapons, the missile program, assets, visas and so on. So, it's not just a suggestion like, let's develop a new package of sanctions. No, it's the reinstatement of those resolutions that hit the Iranian economy and military industry. Iran immediately took a stance, saying that this is harmful to diplomacy. Why are the Europeans doing this? They're friendly and open to negotiation. Europe responds quite calmly and says that Iran has not complied with the conditions for a long time. The International Atomic Energy Agency doesn't see the full picture regarding the nuclear program because the Iranians don't let them in. Iran is clearly stalling and doesn't want to conduct any reasonable negotiations. This triggers the mechanism to reinstate all sanctions. Let me quickly remind you why this is happening. The thing is, this mechanism, snapback, and the right of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom to reinstate all these sanctions at the United Nations level literally expires in October. After that, in order to reinstate any sanctions against Iran, it would be necessary to convene the Security Council, the United Nations Security Council. There, most likely, Russia and China would block any decision with their veto power, and no sanctions against Iran would be reinstated. But when the nuclear deal was in place, it was these three European countries that had the right to activate the snapback mechanism at any time and reinstate the sanctions. This mechanism, let me repeat, ends in October. Now it has been activated, and in 30 days the sanctions should be reinstated, and that's it. Basically, that's where the story ends. Let's continue. How is this connected to Ukraine, you may ask? Directly, because Iran is not just about drones, it's also about components, logistics, and transactions through so-called third countries. And the return of sanctions under the United Nations umbrella is a completely different level of pressure compared to a set of scattered national sanction packages. When the United Nations Security Council regulation comes back into play, insurance companies, banks, and ports all over the world start behaving differently. Cracking down on grey schemes is now standard, not just a private effort. Russia and China can't claim that these are some kind of illegal sanctions because they themselves are involved, especially China. They always say sanctions should match the United Nations Security Council level. Well, here it is. These aren't just separate sanctions from Europe or the United States. And for Russians, this means that it's no longer possible to replenish their fleet of drones, missiles, and so on. For Ukraine, this is an added layer of security for cities and the energy system in the coming months. But let's get back to Sadr, that very official who made this statement. Why did he say this now? Because Iran, the June strikes by Israel were too precise. And now the Iranian audience is demanding an answer. How did this happen? Where were our air defense systems? Why were the Israelis and Americans so accurate? Why did we have no protection at all? Sadr explained the accuracy simply, blaming outside help for the enemy and Moscow's cold stance. I'm not saying he's right, factually speaking. We're not inside those channels, but the political effect of his statement has already taken place. And here the tone is very important. It's not us who are disappointed. It's specifically the phrase Russians betrayed us. So it's not like, oh, listen, we didn't get any help from the Russians. No, Sadr says, the Russians betrayed us, the Russians are traitors. This is bad news for Moscow all around, both for deep friendship, reputation, and future supplies. Europe, in turn, took advantage of the moment when public opinion in the West no longer asked for any explanation as to why Iran is a problem. Everything is fine, everyone understands. And the statement from this group, Britain, France, and Germany, reads as if Iran is systematically not fulfilling the agreement. They allow inspectors in selectively, so we include everything. The switch, let's start the sanctions all over again. And you know, I want to emphasize, it really is a switch. It's not about discussing new sanctions, it's done instantly. And they kick in for 30 days, and the provisions that block the channels for supplying technology, money, and so on come back into effect. Well, you can argue about how quickly all this will hit the Iranian economy, but it's pointless to argue that it will hit. It will hit, period. Now, the Kremlin faces an unpleasant dilemma. On one hand, there's a public accusation from a partner without whom the Shahed program for the war against Ukraine would have been much more modest. On the other hand, a legal trap is emerging for Moscow at the United Nations, which Moscow has already tried to circumvent more than once, and which will now be harder to bypass. Add to this the general trend. Global insurers have become much stricter about disputes related to Iran, and banks in the Emirates, for example, in Asia, have become more cautious with grey payments. All this forms the backdrop for the Russian military economy's struggles. Against this backdrop, Ukraine appears to be the only side that can afford pragmatic optimism. Every severed communication channel means a few dozen fewer of these Shaheds in the sky, And that's one less backup route for Russian supply schemes. And yes, this is not an instant salvation. Unfortunately, it's about consistency, but this step is genuine, not just for appearance. And let's wrap it all up with logic. As you can see, two things happened on the same day: the loud complaint from the Iranians towards Russia and the legal launch of sanctions under the snapback scheme. Plus, the tough stance of the International Atomic Energy Agency on insufficient cooperation. For Moscow, this is a story without a good ending. Either quarrel with Tehran and say, "How dare you call us traitors," or stay silent and quietly swallow the humiliation while at the same time looking for new loopholes in the sanctions barrier. And as we can see from Moscow's reaction, they decided to swallow that very humiliation. For Kiev, this is a window through which they can push their allies to strengthen control over the supply lines of drones, components, finances, and so on. Well, and here the moral is simple. Alliances without values crumble when the scale of benefits changes. Today, the scale of benefits has changed. And Moscow, Russians are the kind of people you can't build alliances with. They are traitors, they are rats who will take advantage, and then, when it's their turn to help, they either stab you in the back or just run away. Here, Moscow chose the second option. They ran away. And now in Tehran, they're saying, how could this happen? We signed a strategic partnership agreement there. We're allies. How could you do this? The Russians respond, what did you expect? It's us, the unwashed Russians from the swamps. We're barbarians, we're savages. So what else did you expect? I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's it for now. Take care. Bye, everyone.